Chapter 5 of Tractate Chullin continues covering the laws of slaughter, now on the principle against slaughtering certain animals on the same day. The first Mishnah says, as the verse states, an ox or a seh, it and its offspring you shall not slaughter on one day. It's forbidden to slaughter an animal and its offspring on the same day. This principle applies both inside and outside of Jerusalem, both when the temple does and does not exist, and to both consecrated and unconsecrated animals. So there are essentially 12 possible cases. If an unconsecrated animal and its unconsecrated offspring were slaughtered on the same day outside the temple, they can both be eaten, and there's 40 lashes for doing this. If both animals are consecrated and they're slaughtered outside the temple, the first slaughter receives kares, divine punishment. Both animals are prohibited to be benefited from, and there's 40 lashes for both. If both animals are unconsecrated and they're slaughtered inside the temple courtyard, they're both unfit, and there's 40 lashes for the second slaughter. If both animals are consecrated and they're slaughtered inside the temple, the first animal is a proper offering, and the second animal is unfit, and there's 40 lashes. If the first animal is unconsecrated and the second is consecrated, and they're both slaughtered outside the temple, the first animal is fine and valid, and the second is invalid, and there's 40 lashes. If the first animal is consecrated and the second is unconsecrated, and they're both slaughtered outside the temple, the first animal is invalid, and there's a penalty of kares, and the second is valid, and there's 40 lashes for both. If the first animal is unconsecrated and the second is consecrated, and they're both slaughtered inside the temple, they're both invalid, and there's 40 lashes for the second one. If the first animal is consecrated and the second is unconsecrated, and they're both slaughtered inside the temple, the first animal is fine and valid, and the second is invalid, and there's 40 lashes. If both the animals are unconsecrated and the first is slaughtered outside the temple and the second is slaughtered inside, the first slaughter is fine and valid, the second is invalid, and there's 40 lashes. If both the animals are consecrated and the first is slaughtered outside the temple and the second is slaughtered inside, the first slaughter is invalid and there's liability for kares, the second is invalid and there's 40 lashes for both. If both the animals are unconsecrated and the first is slaughtered inside the temple and the second is slaughtered outside, the first slaughter is invalid with no liability, the second is valid and there's 40 lashes. If both of the animals are consecrated and the first is slaughtered inside the temple and the second is slaughtered outside, the first slaughter is valid with no liability, the second is invalid, and there's 40 lashes. The Gemara quotes sources for this concept further. There's a dispute based on verses if this concept applies to any animal and its offspring, or specifically to females and their offspring, and not males. In the end, it rules that this whole concept applies to both males and females and their offspring. As we see, we rule out this concept in other cases. This is additionally relevant to prohibit mating the product of a forbidden crossbreed with the same species as its own mother, for instance a mule with a female horse. Some say in such a case it would only be permissible to mate it with another mule, although it is agreed it cannot be mated with species of its mother, and there's a doubt if we're concerned with the father's species. It also mentions other forbidden animal crossbreeds, such as the product of a sheep and a goat, which cannot be slaughtered on the same day as its parent, while the product of a goat and a deer can be slaughtered on the same day as its parent. Others say this actually refers to the offspring of the deer and goat and its own child. Further, it said if a male deer and female goat produce offspring, according to the opinion that we're not sure if we're concerned for the paternity of the animal, to be stringent, the animal cannot be slaughtered on a holiday, and if it is slaughtered, its blood is not covered. It additionally debates this case as to what obligations are required by this animal as to whether the blood must be covered during slaughter, if it can be slaughtered on the same day as its parent. There are a few opinions. Some actually disagree with the definition of this animal. Some just say it's its own creature, it's not a crossbreed of two different animals. Some just simply translated the animal as the wild ram. Similarly, the forest goat is disputed as to what type of animal it is and as to whether it can be offered on the altar. Now, our Mishnah stated that if a consecrated animal and its consecrated offspring are offered outside the temple on the same day, there's liability of kares for the first and there's lashes for both. Evidently, this disagrees with the opinion that a slaughter that is invalid is not considered to be an active slaughter, as the first animal was not slaughtered. It was just killed effectively, meaning the second animal should actually have kares for being slaughtered outside the temple if we were holding with this opinion. So there are similar issues by the same principle with other cases, so clearly this Mishnah does not accord with this opinion. This is necessary to state for the case of the slaughter of consecrated animals inside the temple, that slaughter doesn't itself immediately permit the meat, and it's considered to be invalid. There are other violations done in this case of messing up temple offerings by the consecrated animals inside the temple, but it only mentioned the points on the prohibitions against slaughtering an animal with its offspring, and lashes are an extension of this specifically, which is why those are included. Alternatively, it's just that the remaining issues of impurity just don't apply here, based on a verse. Some say the prohibitions against slaughtering an animal with its offspring just don't apply to consecrated animals, as if it's invalid, it's not considered to have been slaughtered, which applies by consecrated animals, so there would be no issue with the offspring, as you basically can't slaughter them in the technical sense on the same day at all. Others dispute this concept at length. It is alternatively suggested that this opinion just holds that the lashes would not apply. In fact, if an unconsecrated offering and its offspring, which is an ola offering, are slaughtered on the same day, it's a debate if there's lashes based on whether the burning of the ola is considered to be a form of consumption, and therefore if the concept of slaughter applies there. New Mishnah: if somebody slaughters an animal and finds that it has a defect, or if it's slaughtered for idolatry, or it's a red heifer, or it's been sentenced to be stoned or to be decapitated, and then he also slaughters its offspring or parent on the same day, there's a dispute if there's liability. If somebody slaughters an animal and he messes it up, so it's improperly slaughtered, and then also its offspring or parents on the same day, it's agreed that there's no liability for this. The Gemara says an opinion. This only applies if the first animal is slaughtered for idolatry and the second animal is slaughtered for eating. If the first animal was slaughtered for eating and the second was slaughtered for idolatry, there's no lashes, as he's already getting the greater sentence of capital punishment. This is said to apply even if the man wasn't warned against his idolatry, meaning capital punishment wouldn't apply here. Although others disagree, saying there would also be liability for the smaller penalty. It also clarifies that the red heifer, which was part of the list, that's just an error and shouldn't be there, as its meat is actually fit for consumption at one point. It debates if the same principle applies by the beheaded calf of the Egla Arofo that was mentioned, as it's technically allowed to be eaten before it's decapitated, although it mostly disputes as to who exactly held this opinion. New Mishnah: if two people buy a cow and its offspring on the same day, whoever bought it first can slaughter it first on that day. If the second buyer anyways slaughtered his animal first, he can still eat of its meat. The Gemara says this is more of a court ruling than anything. It's said to be fine if the second buyer slaughters his earlier, as it's not a transgression and he can profit from this. New Mishnah: if somebody slaughtered a cow and then two of its calves on the same day, he gets 80 lashes. If he slaughtered two calves and then their mother, he only gets 40 lashes. If he slaughtered a cow, its daughter, and its granddaughter on one day, he gets 80 lashes. If he slaughtered a cow, its granddaughter, and then its daughter, it's a debate if he gets 40 or 80 lashes. The Gemara quotes sources for this. These are discussed, and it debates the ending case of the Mishnah as to the individual logics. The one that says there's 80 lashes essentially holds that if somebody does two transgressions in a single lapse of awareness, he would need to bring two offerings, which it'd spend some time discussing potential sources for. These are additionally discussed, rejecting a number of attempted proofs. New Mishnah: there are 4 times a year where somebody selling an animal must tell the customer that he also sold the animal's mother or child for slaughter earlier that day. These are big holidays where presumably everybody's immediately slaughtering their animals. The eve of the final day of the holiday of Sukkot, the eve of the first day of Passover, the eve of the holiday of Shavuos, the eve of Rosh Hashanah, and according to some, also the eve of Yom Kippur, specifically in the region of Galilee. This applies if the animals are being sold on the same day. If one animal is sold to a bride and the other is sold to a groom, they must be informed about both sales, so that way they won't be slaughtered on the same day. Similarly, on these 4 occasions, a butcher can be forced to slaughter an animal. Essentially, if a customer pays a small amount for some meat, and the butcher later finds that he doesn't have enough customers to make the slaughter worthwhile, he nevertheless needs to fulfill his end to slaughter the animal and supply the meat. Although if the animal dies before slaughter, the loss is incurred by the customer, unlike by the rest of the year. The Gemara says, it mentioned the mother animal being sold to the groom specifically to show that it's common for the groom to invest more into the wedding celebration. The final case is additionally clarified. It said that the customer actually acquired a portion of the animal by drawing it near to himself, although some just say that uniquely on those 4 days, it would be sufficient, at least biblically, to acquire meat via a payment. New Mishnah: regarding this day period where you cannot slaughter an animal and its offspring, this goes by the night until the day. This is actually the definition of a day, according to Jewish law, that it begins by the prior night. As by the creation of the world, it says, and there was evening and there was morning one day, meaning night goes first. The Gemara additionally expounds on this, and that's the end of chapter 5.